Welcome back, friends, to the next entry of my Madness Lore Explained video series. Before we jump back into the lore following Madness 4, there's a few things I wanted to clarify about my last video that I wasn't entirely clear about. In the last video, I repeatedly referred to Madness Project Nexus Classic Episode 1.5 Ground Zero as simply Madness 1.5. A few people were confused and believed I was stating that it is actually Madness Combat 1.5. This is not the case. I just simply didn't want to say Project Nexus Classic 1.5 over and over again, so sorry for any confusion there. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I might say a few things in this video that could upset people in regards to Madness lore, specifically the timeline. Please rest assured that nothing I say in this video is necessarily gospel, or should be considered objective fact or truth. I will always clarify when I am speaking on theory or headcanon, but I will do my best to lay out the known information of Madness lore as clearly and concisely as possible. Please, be respectful towards one another. I understand debate over this lore can get pretty heated. No flame wars in the comments section, please. Remain civil. And lastly, if I can go on a bit of a side tangent here, I've learned recently that this whole YouTube thing is actually pretty darn fun, and I enjoy making videos. You guys have come out of the woodwork to show your support, and at the time of writing this script, I've reached over 7,000 subscribers on my channel, a number I never thought I'd reach. Because of this, I've got what's called a Ko-fi, or a Ko-fi, I'm not entirely sure how it's actually said. If you'd like to support the channel directly, you can throw some cold hard cash my way through the link on your screen or in the video description below. The money will go directly into paying my bills every month, thus keeping me out of a job, and thus giving me ample time to make more videos for you guys to enjoy. Of course, you're not obligated to do so, and I'll stop wasting your time with such things. And as always, thank you and enjoy. Let's get back into the lore. Dissenter.fla. Dissenter is a bit of a weird entry into the Madness timeline. Really, this episode could actually go in a few different places, but I've decided to place it here for a few reasons. The number one reason I'm placing it just after Madness 4 is because of a certain flashback depicted in MPN. More on that in a bit. But for now, Dissenter is a pretty straightforward episode. If you've only ever watched the cartoons, this cartoon was probably your first ever exposure to Doc as a character. However, from what we know of Arena Mode, Doc appears a bit earlier into the timeline, and we know that he is the leader of Status Quo. In this episode, Doc battles some agency against Hank Wimbledon, AAHW for simplicity, soldiers who are attempting to infiltrate his base of operations, which you'll notice is the same lab from Arena Mode. Doc quickly deals with the agency interlopers, even tricking one of the soldats into firing an RPG directly into his own men. Here we get a glimpse into Doc's character, in that he is someone who prefers not to fight directly if he can help it, and prefers to set traps and use misdirection in order to deal with his foes. The episode ends with Doc complaining about the agency breaking his stuff, and that Hank doesn't even live here anymore. That's a pretty big revelation and lets us know that Doc is housed in Hank's old place, and could explain some of the history the characters have with one another. Ultimately, it seems Doc wasn't aware of Hank until his death in Madness 4, and the unusual circumstances of his revival led to Doc becoming interested in Hank to begin with. After felling the agency troops, Doc throws their corpses around the back of his house, and these events will lead into one of the flashbacks of Madness Project Nexus. I think I'll just play it for you.
Okie dokie.
You stand not a chance.
Okay.
Desist.
Okay.
During this meeting, we pretty clearly see that Hank has been recruited by Doc for a mission. The mission itself? Destroy Project Nexus. But first Hank has to bust Doc's quote-unquote guys out of jail. This is referencing to the very beginning of Madness Project Nexus Classic, where we see Hank doing exactly that. That's why I place it just after Madness 4 here. Doc also mentions stitching Jebus up from the quote-unquote scattered remnants of his own corpse, which is a direct reference to his explosive death in Madness 4. With that out of the way, we can finally start talking about Madness Project Nexus Classic. Alright, we're finally here to Nexus Classic Story Mode. I'm mostly going to try and breeze through this since nothing overly important happens here, but it's still worth talking about. Nexus Classic begins with Hank, immediately after his meeting with Doc, with the rocket launcher he mentioned earlier. His orders are simple: rescue noobs, acquire hardware, and then destroy Project Nexus. Hank uses the rocket launcher to blow a hole into the side of the agency base, a former Nexus Core outpost that has been converted into an agency outpost in the 30 years it has been abandoned. Hank doesn't simply use the front door because he's too cool to do that. It's like Batman, he has to use anything but the front door. After some brief tutorials, Hank guns down agent after agent, a familiar sight to most Madness fans, before rescuing Sanford and Demos out of jail. Chronologically, this is Hank's first time ever meeting these two, but most of you watching are already probably quite familiar with them. Sanford and Demos made their debut in the cartoons in Madness Combat 5, but as far as the timeline is concerned, their first appearance is here after Madness 4. Now, I can already hear some of you yelling at your screen, "Zap, that makes no sense. Sanford and Demos are grunts in Madness 5. They didn't get their outfits until 6.5. How could you miss such an obvious detail?" And you're probably also asking, how can Hank be in his ninja outfit? He didn't get that outfit until at least Madness 7. It doesn't make any sense. How can this be after Madness 4? And to that I say, hold your horses, dear viewer. We will discuss that at length when we get to the end of Project Nexus proper. But for now, bear with me. Nexus Classic continues from the perspective of Sanford and Demos as they run through agency base after agency base, blowing them up and destroying vital communications outposts to help cripple the agency a little bit more as they make their way towards the outskirts of Nexus City. Along the way, Sanford and Demos run across an agency party. What are they celebrating? Who knows? Perhaps the death of a high-value target? Either way, as Sanford and Demos battle their way through this party, they encounter some familiar faces, those of Swain, Crinkles, Cheshire, and Luis, all developers of the original Project Nexus. They meet quite unceremonious and canonical deaths here. There's no real reason for me to bring it up other than the fact that I wanted to say the sentence "Crinkles is canonically dead in Madness" at least once. Fast forwarding to the end of Nexus Classic, Sanford, Demos, and Hank join forces to battle Mag Agent N. They succeed in destroying the gargantuan agent and steal a truck that we'll see again in the beginning of Madness Project Nexus. Oh man, looks like we finally made it to the Goliath of this entire video. Madness Project Nexus, bar none, contains the most amount of lore of any official piece of Madness media. This absolute behemoth of a game is where 90% of our lore knowledge comes from both story and arena mode. I was considering covering both story and arena in the same segment, but ultimately I decided to go by timeline, so we're only just now getting to story mode. Story mode kicks off immediately after the end of Nexus Classic Story Mode. Sanford, Demos, and Hank are in the same truck they stole at the end of the last game, with agency cronies hot on their tail. Hank holds off the AHW well enough while the truck speeds along, but some bandits on a nearby cliff notice the commotion and decide to boulderize the truck, causing the intrepid trio to crash. After the crash, Hank makes a few sarcastic remarks before we fully meet the bandits, the primary enemy you'll be encountering here in the outskirts of Nexus City. These cannibalistic bandits are the remnants of the people of Nexus City who managed to survive the Z outbreak. The bandits live in the outskirts of the city as the inside of it has become inhospitable, with each sector of the city having something to keep them out. Merc keeps out bandits with constant sniper watch of the city walls, the residential sector is overrun with Zeds, and the commercial and science districts are under Nexus core control. The only bandits still living in the city proper are the ones who managed to escape into the residential sector rooftops. If you take the time to explore the outskirts a bit more, you'll notice that you can enter a gas station, one that has a basement with some mysterious drawings in it. You meet a mysterious character under here, one who immediately retreats upon seeing Hank. This character is fairly obviously the Maker in disguise, the creator of Nevada itself, hunkering down in a musty gas station basement. Why he's here or what he's doing is largely unknown to us, but this room will allow the player to replay some of the flashback sequences that happen throughout story mode. Further into the outskirts, Hank notices he can't get into the city, not with those snipers on top of the wall shooting at him. You'll have to turn off the power to their spotlights in order to progress. Hank enters the power station and encounters Rich, the employee of the month for the agency against Hank Wimbledon. Rich isn't really a member of the agency though, as he just keeps the power on. He's done so for 30 long years now, and Hank has come to send all that hard work right down the drain. Rich doesn't seem to mind though, and makes no effort to stop Hank before he continues on. After disabling the power and battling the AHW inside the power station, Hank runs into a familiar face. The Sheriff, back from the dead. The Sheriff has been revived following his death in Madness 3, and has clearly been jaded by his time in Hell. He's a bit tougher and a bit meaner, feeling confident enough to shoot Hank and threaten him from atop the wall. Despite his new demeanor, the Sheriff is still a coward at heart, and refuses to come down and fight Hank. Hank also remarks having killed the Sheriff once, another reference to Madness 3. I would also like to note early concept art of the Sheriff had stitches across his face, harkening back to his death in Madness 3 with his head being largely destroyed via a shotgun blast. Before Hank can scale the wall and bring the fight to the Sheriff, however, he is interrupted by Mag Bandit, a gargantuan-sized bandit who wants to make Hank into his next meal. We don't exactly know where Mag Bandit came from, but there's a few possibilities. The first possibility is that Mag Bandit is an escaped Nexus core mag who managed to survive the fall of Nexus City, and became a sort of god amongst the bandit cultures. The second possibility is that Mag Bandit was merely just a normal bandit, if a bit on the larger side, who reached massive heights due to the bandits worshipping him and giving him all their food. This implies that even after the fall of Nexus City, the bandits still had a consistent source of food, but gave it all to Mag Bandit as a form of worship. Hank swiftly deals with Mag Bandit, who in a hunger-induced haze runs directly into the industrial sector wall, busting a massive hole into it. Sanford and Demos then appear, and the story continues on from their perspective. And now, we move on to the industrial sector. Hank takes off, saying he needs to find someone. He's going to try and find Dr. Hoffnar's old lab in order to locate him, since he's supposedly the only one who knows how to destroy Project Nexus. Meanwhile, Sanford and Demos set off to find the Sheriff and convince him, quote-unquote, to turn on the tram so they can access the residential sector. Not a whole lot of lore-significant events happen leading up to the confrontation with the Sheriff, so I'll take this time to read out some of the snoopables that can be found in these areas that have lore significance.
Dr. Hoffnar and his research facility are absolutely off limits to you and your employees. He is not to be disturbed under any circumstances. All future material deliveries are to be left with the Nexus core guards outside the sleeper labs. Director Phobos.
This tells us that Merc was delivering important supplies to Dr. Hoffnar. This also gives our first insight of Merc's alliance with the Nexus core, something that'll be explored a little bit later down the line in future snoopables.
When you gave me this job, you told me I'd be autonomous. Having your Nexus core pit bulls snooping around my factory doesn't make me feel like I'm autonomous. I'm not big on all this distrust, pal. It makes me twitchy. So how about you just back off a bit and let me do my job? I got a city to feed. The Sheriff.
The foreman was obviously pretty not impressed by Phobos' handling of Merc, alluding to some notable unease between the two factions in spite of their alliance. Continuing into the Boom Factory, the factory of which Merc produces all of their explosives, we get a few more interesting snoopables.
Okay, limited model Gen 3 clones are here. Thanks a bunch. Was hoping for more than 2 of them, but hey, at least you came through. Why are they so mad though? Foreman.
This is a direct reference to Church and George, the bosses of this particular stage. We'll talk more about them once we get to their fight, but they are effectively defective golems that the Nexus Corps loaned to Merc, as they requested GO3s to assist in the heavy lifting. Golems, or Generation 03 limited models, are the 3rd generation of Nevadian. They were created by the Nexus Corps as servants and butlers, so they have pre-programmed personalities depending on their job. Despite the name Limited Model, the Nexus Corps continued to produce them. Golems seem to be made out of spare parts of other fallen Nevadians with bits of flesh stitched together to make up their being. In spite of their grisly appearance and larger size, most of them are actually quite nice. You find hundreds of accident reports spanning many decades. Several of the accidents look to have been fatal, but somehow, the dead workers keep appearing in future accident reports. This refers to Merc's ability to revive their fallen men. Merc has the same revival technology as the Nexus Corps. This is most likely how they revived the Sheriff off-screen after his death in Madness 3. After shooting, stabbing, and blowing up a heck of a whole lot of Merc workers, Sanford and Demos come face to face with Church and George, 2 idiot golems who more or less act as an inverse to Sanford and Demos themselves. Church is a close-range brawler who prefers to charge head into action, using his deadly shock fist to deal massive damage. Church prefers to hang back and take pot shots with his anti-material rifle. Despite their companionship and dynamic, Church and George are defeated by Sanford and Demos, but rest assured they will appear again later into the story. After defeating Church and George, Sanford and Demos procure some much-needed explosive ordnance in order to blow open the doors to the Sheriff's hideout, the station fortress. Most of this stage is, yet again, fighting more mercs, so let's check out some more snoopables, shall we?
Production of paramilitary equipment will continue as scheduled. However, Project Nexus will no longer require Merc to provide radiation gear. Protection against the maddening effects of dissonant reality are no longer a concern to us. Phobos.
This pretty blatantly shows us that the Nexus Corps neglected their own scientists when it came to the effects of dissonant reality, not even issuing proper protective equipment against such a corrosive and damaging substance. This is a big reason why so many of them went insane and why the Nexus Corps asylums became full so quickly.
You don't know me yet, but you're going to want to hear what I have to say. I've heard about you over the comms. The nice guy shtick seems like more than just a way to sell discount mattresses. If you really care about your people, then know this. You, they, everyone is in danger. Don't try to contact me directly. Director Phobos is having me watched. Send missives to Dr. Hoffner. He can be trusted. I wish I had more time to explain. I'll reach out to you again soon. Dr. Jebediah Christoph.
This is Dr. Christoph contacting the Sheriff about his plot to kill Phobos and destroy Nexus City. Sheriff would then be installed as the leader of Merc under Christoph's orders to seal off the city and ensure maximum destruction of Nexus Corps personnel.
When it happens, you'll know. By the time the alarms sound, Phobos will already be dead. It will be up to you to block the industrial sector from what comes next. It won't be pretty, and I wish there was another way. But what must be done will come to pass. I'll see to that. Nexus City needs a leader in the days to come. I'm sorry that you have to be the one to atone for the sins I must now commit. But I go now knowing the capable hands in which everything will be left. Dr. Jebediah Christoph.
Jebus continuing to gaslight himself into believing any part of this plan was a good idea. What a charming fellow. Letters from the office of Dr. Hoffner, addressed to the Matter and Energy Reclamation Company. They go back quite a few years, and the spelling gets progressively worse over time. The last few pages only read, lol, ruffle, and so on. This shows us Hoffner's descent into insanity, gradually becoming more and more like Tricky as time went on. After fighting through leagues of Merc units, Sanford and Demos finally come face to face with the Sheriff, The three of them have a brief chat with the sheriff under the assumption that the duo is here to kill him to claim the bounty on his head, likely issued to him by the Nexus Corps for assisting in the assassination of Director Phobos. The sheriff laughs that Sanford and Demos seem to think that all Project Nexus is soldier cloning and training. He claims it's much more than that, but before the duo can ask any more questions, a confrontation ensues. The sheriff goes down fairly quickly as Sanford and Demos lead him to the tramway leading to residential. The sheriff states that this is as good a place to die as any, but Sanford and Demos remind him that they were never here to kill him. They only wanted access to the residential trams. Relieved that Sanford and Demos are apparently not here to collect on his bounty, the sheriff allows them access into residential in exchange for his life. Upon getting to the residential sector, Sanford and Demos take note that they have to cut through the rooftops as the ground below is swarming with zombies, making it impossible to progress through the streets below. They also fight city bandits, elite and hardened bandits who have managed to survive up here, despite the Zed infestation below. Most of the first stage of the residential sector is just battling bandits and Zeds, not much to note here, so we'll move right along into the second stage, beat the streets. Sanford and Demos have managed to make it to the street level below, but only a small section that has been mostly barricaded against the Zed infestation. Despite these barricades, the Zeds have still found their way inside, and there is no shortage of zombies to shoot. We also have our first snoopable of the residential sector, which reads,
All citizens of Nexus City, disregard any previous evacuation orders. There are no evacuation orders. Spreading rumors of any so-called Zed apocalypse or Armageddon will be regarded as terrorist propaganda by Nexus authorities. The Nexus Corps is here to protect you. Your tax dollars at work. From the office of Director Phobos.
Here we see the Nexus Corps blatantly denying the Zed infestation caused by Dr. Christoph, ordering citizens to stay put in their homes. This likely caused even more deaths that could have been avoided if the citizens were properly told when and how to escape. Making their way to the other side of the streets, Sanford and Demos come across Burger Gills, a hotspot for burger fanatics of all walks of life in Nexus City's heyday. Demos in particular is a huge fan of Gill burgers, and is excited to meet Burger Gill himself.
Local big man and entrepreneur Burger Gill receives rave reviews and commendations for his charitable work towards Nexus City's less fortunates. When asked about his work in the kitchen, Gill said,
I consider myself very fortunate. I hope to keep flipping burgers till the day I die.
Unfortunately for the duo, Gill has succumbed to zombification and has taken to turning his customers into the burgers. In order to progress down into the sewers of Nexus City, Sanford and Demos are forced to put the old burger-slinging golem out of his misery. With Gill dead, Sanford and Demos proceed down into the sewers, where they encounter disgusting swamp zombies that spit sewer water onto them, as well as Church and George, who have seemingly been following them this entire time. Wearing armor to fend off Zeds, Church and George attack again, but are defeated once more by Sanford and Demos, concluding the residential sector as Sanford and Demos make their way into the mining sector. But before we go along with Sanford and Demos' story, why don't we check up on what Hank has been up to? Hank's made it to the commercial district, now on the hunt for Christoph's old notes so he can find out how to open the way to Hoffnar's old lab. 3 snoopables can be found, each one revealing the hidden code in order to access Nexus Core Asylum and Hoffnar's old lab.
It's worse than I feared. Much, much worse. Phobos has repurposed our Sleepwalker program to train himself a personal army. He's going to seize the city, and he'll gladly doom Nevada to ruin in order to do it. I wonder if the employers know about Phobos' absolute corruption, or if they're even still around. I wonder if they know I'm planning to kill Phobos and dismantle this whole unscrupulous system. I've already reached out to that mattress salesman about helping me. I hope I can count on you too, Dr. Jebediah Christoph. Postscript. I think Phobos' Nexus Core goons know about your secret door behind the bookshelf. Reset the password to my name to slow them down, okay? That lousy bastard! Phobos isn't shutting down Plan Z, even after I explained the risks to him. Permanently binding a self to a body isn't just logical sacrilege. It's going to corrupt the whole divergence process. I don't like where Project Nexus is headed. We're supposed to be saving the world here. When did it become about keeping costs down and profits up? I'm coming over to discuss this with you in person. Did you already fix the secret button behind the wall light so I can buzz myself in? Dr. Zebediah Christoph. I can't believe it. Director Phobos is finally going to push forward with our Sleepwalker program. I haven't got him on record stating he intends to retire Plan Z, but now that we've given him a viable alternative to infectious zombies, we can get Project Nexus back on point. I'm putting together a manifesto for the director on why Plan Z needs to go. I'll leave a copy for you at your office entrance inside Angerware. Dr. Zebediah Christoph.
Hank fights his way through the asylum, undergoing an impromptu psychological evaluation. The evaluation claims that Hank has failed the analysis 12% below safe threshold. Hank's only comment on this is, okay then. Hank also finds an evacuation order snoopable, one issued by Dr. Hoffnar himself. According to Hoffnar, there should be no official Nexus Corps personnel operating in this asylum, and all asylum patients were left behind during this evacuation. Once Hank reaches Hoffnar's lab, there's a few notable snoopables to be recorded. Day 12. Even if Kristoff finds a way to bring selves back to Nevada from the other place, we have no guarantee of the integrity of the self. All of my research tells me it is a place of psychopathic derangement and insanity. I'm afraid of what may come of it. Hoffnar's original musings about the other place, and potential consequences that may come from tampering with it. Hoffnar was correct in that tampering with the other place is a fantastically terrible idea, but if there's one thing you can count on the Nexus for, it's not listening. Day 118. We are making substantial progress with Project Nexus. Director Phobos has erected a massive gateway directly into the science tower, and now we're putting more selves into bodies than ever before. But accessing the other place has yielded some repercussions. A corrupting force I've come to refer to as dissonant reality is warping logic and distorting the mind of anyone who perceives it. I've had to pull my scientists from the tower. Phobos is pissed, but the safety of my guys comes first. Hoffnar shows selflessness here, prioritizing his own men over himself. He comments on the damaging effects of dissonant reality, something that will soon come to populate this asylum with many of his fellow scientists. Day 402. Haha! It works! Dissonant reality can be contained, and I'm the one who figured it out! Using my own patented divergence engine technology, I was able to filter the dissonant reality radiation into simple canisters for storage and processing. This will safeguard the entire process henceforth. Now, to find a way to hide this discovery from that bastard Phobos. From here on out, I'm going to have to be extremely careful. The moment he finds out I've solved the dissonant reality crisis, he'll weaponize the whole process, and that's going to make my job a bit tricky. Unfortunately, Hoffnar was not able to hide his discoveries from Phobos, as we see dissonant-related weapons later on in the story mode. Hoffnar's declining mental state is also hinted at here. Note the reference to Tricky the Clown. After snooping around Hoffnar's old notes, Dr. Kristoff finally decides to float on down and say hi. Jebus goes on and on about how attempting to use Project Nexus will not benefit Hank, and he's better off turning around and walking away. Hank and Jebus get into a bit of a scuffle about it, but once the dust is settled, Jeb realizes that he and Hank's goals actually align with each other. Hank wants to shut down Project Nexus, and that's a plan Jebus can get behind. So the two team up and try to find Dr. Hoffnar and learn how to shut the project down for good. Now that Jebus and Hank have teamed up, they enter the old Sleeper Labs, where we learn the original arena mode experiment was actually held. Hank and Jebus visit the old arena, where they're forced to fight sleepwalkers who seem to have now taken over the old labs. After destroying the sleepwalkers, Hank and Jebus continue forth, but are stopped in their tracks when they realize the doors ahead will not open. They only opened in the case of Subject 1B dying, so one of the two has to drink poison, just enough to stop the heart for a moment before being revived. Also, a piece of Subject 1B's journal can be found in this stage, where he muses over completing his 100th match, and how cool he thinks it is that the Nexus Corps can revive him so many times over. After completing the arena, Hank and Jebus find themselves in Murder Time, Tricky's own knockoff of his favorite show Slaughter Time, which can be seen over in MPN's arena mode. Tricky refuses to help Jeb and Hank, preferring to put them through the gauntlet. Also, Tricky mentions teaming up with Jeb to kill Hank, a direct reference to the events of Madness Combat 3, further proving MPN's placement in the timeline. Hank and Jebus fight their way through hordes of asylum patients and traps, ultimately surviving the horrifying game of death. Before they can continue interrogating Hofnar, however, the Nexus Core shows up and they must be dealt with. After dealing with the Nexus Core, Hofnar agrees to help Jeb and Hank in their quest to shut down the Nexus by showing them where they need to go. Beneath the streets of the commercial district lies a secret Nexus Core facility, one filled with all sorts of horrible monstrosities and experiments. Jeb and Hank raid the secret facility in order to locate keys to the Divergence engine, integral parts of the engine that are needed for it to function. Fighting their way through the Nexus Core soldiers, Jeb and Hank find themselves in the room with the Divergence engine keys. Jebus stores them in a pocket dimension located inside the Halo for future use. However, after collecting the second key, it's revealed to Jebus that Phobos was able to initiate Project Gestalt, and Jeb's worst fears have been made reality. Jeb and Hank run into a room with a massive elevator, of which they use to crush Gestalt into the mining sector below. Guess he's Sanford and Deimos' problem for the time being. Speaking of Sanford and Deimos, why don't we go check on them in the mining sector? After defeating Gil, Church and George, and also Mag Bandit again, I forgot to mention him earlier, he's probably dead for real this time, Sanford and Deimos continue deeper into the mining sector, hoping to find a route that will lead them into the Science Tower district of Nexus City. Here in the mining sector, we meet Zed-worshipping cultists, member of the Cult of Buoyancy formed by Dr. Crackpot before the fall of Nexus City. We learn from the stage Seeking Asylum that Crackpot had been funneling the insane asylum patients into the sewers of Nexus City to form his cult in relative secret. These cultists also have quite a few religious documents that are worth reading over.
And we be unto those unbuoyant who have erred under the guidance of the false prophet Jebediah Christoph and his pseudo-scientific Tower of Babel. For only through buoyancy may we avoid the true and dreaded end of all living things, dissension into the other place.
Here we see a core tenet of the buoyant philosophy. They decide to prevent their own passage to the other place by becoming zombies upon death, forever binding their self to a physical form in Nevada.
It was only by the divination of his buoyancy and his loving embrace that begot the multitudes, those who could not return to death from life, the buoyant. They would replace the hubris children of the wretched Jebediah Christoph, the punished ones, terrible abominations they, who hunger and howl and send others needlessly to an unbuoyant death, that this false prophet should stand in judgment of his buoyancy's masterwork and call it Plan Z. Such hubris, for it shall stand be Christoph who stands judged when the other place awakens and claims us all.
This seems to be a cultist ranting and raving about Christoph in particular, who killed who knows how many people and sent themselves straight to hell because of it. Although, shouldn't these cultists be worshipping him since he created a massive Zed outbreak and created legions of these quote-unquote buoyant ones they seem to worship? Perhaps Crackpot is lying about what really happened during Jeb's insurrection.
When the end of times, thusly foretold by his buoyancy's great benefactor, the eminent director Phobos, and those higher powers what saw it fit to pass, it will be at the failure of the unbuoyant masses to halt its coming. The fate of Nevada rests now in the hands of beings too lesser to know the responsibility they so willingly shoot, cut, and bash their way to all of our ruin. We will be forgotten, every one of us, as a dream, and then we will be no more.
The cultists muse that the fate of Nevada has been left in the hands of those unworthy of it, those being people like Sanford, Deimos, and Hank. They expect Nevada to be destroyed at their hands, and they wouldn't be entirely wrong. It's also possible that the cultists are aware of the madness that plagues Nevada and simply await the end times because of it. After shooting, stabbing, and bashing their way through a horde of Zeds and cultists, Sanford and Deimos find themselves face to face with Church and George for the third and final time. This is the most difficult Church and George fight in the game, but if you manage to get past it, you can continue on through the mining sector and not have to worry about fighting these chuckleheads again. Moving on to Chasms, the second stage in the mining sector, sector, we actually get to meet Dr. Crackpot here. Hooray! But before we do that, we've got some more snoopables to look over.
Despite what you may have heard, Director Phobos is not going forward with Dr. Crackpot's absolutely insane protocol. Locking a self into a body, even after death, will have repercussions that I shouldn't even have to explain. There are plenty of great opportunities to further Project Nexus, and this one, by far, the very last one our leadership would be tempted to try. Please continue installing the self-extractors below the science tower, and rest assured that your well-being is my top priority. Dr. Jebediah Christoph.
This email gives us some insight into Jebus's mindset that eventually sets him down the path of destroying Phobos and nearly destroying the Nexus core. Jeb attempts to inform the Merc workers down in the mining sector that Plan Z will not happen, although this is blatantly false information. We also get one of our first mentions of the self-extractors, massive pumps located deep in the mining sector in order to extract self-energy from the other place.
Hello, Merc employees. Please disregard the bogus email sent by Dr. Christoph. He's not thinking very clearly. In fact, I think his email was hacked. It wasn't even him. I have assurances from the director himself that we will be moving forward with my groundbreaking new enmeshment program. Imagine it, workplace accidents would be a thing of the past when you don't have to worry about dying. Think of how much you'll save on life insurance. Wow! Keep up the good work, boys. Love, Dr. Crackpot.
Here we see Dr. Crackpot assuring the Merc workers down in the mining sector that yes, Plan Z is in full operation and Phobos fully continues to go along with it. Crackpot calls it the enmeshment program here, while in a later email Jebus will call it Plan Z. I prefer to say Plan Z specifically because it would make Dr. Crackpot very angry.
Ignore all past and future notices from Dr. Crackpot's email address, please. Director Phobos is absolutely 100% not going to enact what is undoubtedly the worst plan we've ever heard of. Binding a self to a corpse is such a quintessentially stupid plan, in fact, that it is literally the last plan we would ever consider. That is why any plan, from A to Y, would be preferable to his abhorrent Plan Z, Dr. Jebediah Christoph.
And this is where we got the name Plan Z from. I personally find it a much catchier name than the enmeshment program. If I had to pick one which would go on a t-shirt, it'd definitely be Plan Z. But yes, this is also how we've learned about the direct creation of Zeds. They are the result of the binding, or enmeshment, of a self to a corpse, causing reanimation. Given the larger volume of self-energy moving through the system, as well as the greater demand for power, we will be taking on another labor force division comprised entirely of Generation 3 limited model helpers. Their integration into the workforce should be an even distribution, but an effort must be made to place the more durable Gen 3s on hazard duty to mitigate the cost of workplace accidents. A solid example of golems being used for their intended purpose, free labor. Golems were originally created as butlers and laborers and were generally placed into more hazardous lines of work due to being quote-unquote cheaper to produce than Generation 4s.
Dr. Christoph is an arrogant fool. Block his email address and delete all of his hogwash lies from your inboxes, please. They're all filthy with computer viruses. No one is calling my program Plan Z, especially not Director Phobos, who has granted me a commendation for my fine work on self-binding. Christoph is a jealous fearmonger who wants to watch Project Nexus fail. What a class act, that guy. He's a crummy scientist, too. All of his science is really lazy and probably plagiarized from preschoolers. Yours truly, Dr. Crackpot.
I don't have much of a reason to include this email in the list of snoopables of lore significance, other than to highlight the fact that Dr. Crackpot is, indeed, a whiny piss baby with an ego. Also, his comment on Jebus plagiarizing his science is deeply ironic coming from Crackpot, as it's heavily implied that he stole the idea for enmeshment technology from Doc's arena experiments all the way back during arena mode. After fighting their way through elite bandit soldiers, Sanford Sanford and Demos find themselves in an area with Dr. Crackpot, who isn't going to get out of their way without a fight. Crackpot shows off some of his special powers here, abilities he no doubt gained through exposure to dissonant reality. In spite of Crackpot's powers, Sanford and Demos defeat him with relative ease. Crackpot then begins monologuing about his cult, but is crushed to death by Gestalt shortly after. The very same Gestalt that Hank and Jebus sent down to the mining sector by dropping an elevator on him a few stages ago. Thanks, guys. If you're wondering what happens to Crackpot after this, we'll see him as a Zed during the credit sequence of the game. Who knows? Maybe becoming undead was the best thing that ever happened to him? After Crackpot gets turned into a vaguely plagued doctor-shaped splat on the ground, Sanford and Demos make a run for it by using the old mining sector tramway. The way is dangerous and full of hazards, and Gestalt is giving chase the entire time, but the dynamic duo eventually escape by the skin of their teeth. They rotate a valve that defloods the third and final level of the mining sector, the last leg, which allows Sanford and Demos a way to the science tower via the massive elevator leading to it. There isn't a whole lot to note here in the last leg, except for the boss of this area, the Ghoul. Ghoul was a robot created by the Nexus Core, specifically on corpse cleaning duty. Ghoul's purpose was to go around the mining sector, consuming any dead bodies or Zeds it ran across, as a way of helping quote-unquote contain the Zed infestation down here. Ghoul is a very insectoid creature in design, allowing it increased mobility when moving around the rocky terrain, and a laser it can use to blast away rocks or enemies. Unfortunately, despite their being very alive, Ghoul has decided to make a meal out of Sanford and Demos, a decision that will cost it its life. It's not an easy fight, but in due time Sanford and Demos are able to destroy Ghoul, and finally make their way up to the Science Tower. But before they can enter the Science Tower district, they have a run-in with everyone's favorite murderous clown. After a brief confrontation, Tricky drops some foreshadowing about how destroying Project Nexus will actually cause the end of the world. Oh no! Sanford and Demos also get their first inkling of information on the true purpose of Project Nexus, which is to cycle selves out of the other place and back into Nevada. But before Sanford and Demos can grill Tricky for any more answers, he decides to disappear in a puff of confetti, leaving the duo to ruminate on this newfound information. We're finally here at the end of the road. The Science Tower awaits. All of our protagonists are finally assembled for the final area of the game. Sanford, Demos, and Hank initially meet up in front of the Science Tower. Sanford and Demos are beginning to question the nature of the mission and suggest that destroying Project Nexus might not actually be a good idea. A move so bad it could end the world. Hank doesn't seem to care though. Before this discussion can continue, however, Jebus floats down. After some brief introductions, the main protagonists devise a game plan. Jebus will fly up to a higher area of the tower in order to scout for notable threats. Sanford, Demos, and Hank will team up to storm the Science Tower from the ground floor up, eventually meeting up with Kristoff at the halfway point of the tower. Base jumping, the first stage of the Science Tower, is fairly uneventful aside from the usual action violence you're used to in Madness. The trio are met with a concierge, who makes no effort to stop them other than asking for them to sign themselves in. After doing so, the trio goes up the escalator and sees a massive statue of Director Phobos, the first time we actually see his visage in this game. Upon getting to the upper floor, chaos ensues, so let's have a look at some more snoopables, shall we? A bunch of requisition proposals from agencies across Nevada for purchases of hundreds of units from the Nexus Core. Basically, the Nexus Core has infinite soldiers due to their self-recycling program, aka Project Nexus. In order to profit off of these excess soldiers, the Nexus has been selling them to agencies all across Nevada, including the AHW. A cursory study of screens show the sum total of personnel processed into and out of Project Nexus. Of the clientele, the AAHW is the leading consumer of Generation 4 soldiers, and tied to their orders are automatic insolvency repair shipments of golems and labor to the mining sector. Further confirmation that the AAHW has been buying massive amounts of soldiers directly from the Nexus Core in order to fuel their ranks. Golems are also automatically being sent down to the mining sector in order to repair the self-extractors, and for general manual labor. It is unknown if this practice is still occurring after the city's initial fall, however. Continuing further into base jumping, the trio are met with their first tower guard. Tower guards are specialized golem units in the Science Tower. tasked with keeping the peace and protecting the tower from invading forces. They are quite difficult to deal with and are very skilled in melee combat, however, the trio is able to defeat them with relative ease. A notable tower guard is the yellow one, who appears to have a Soldat eyepiece. This is a very rare instance of a golem who has undergone the advanced training program, the AHW program that produces engineers and soldats. There's not much else to be said here other than that this golem is quite unique. Before they can continue to the midpoint of the science tower, Sanford, Demos, and Hank encounter the Blackguard, the head of the tower guards and head of security in the science tower, and potentially Nexus City itself before the fall. The Blackguard is functionally invincible, his armor impenetrable by normal means. Thankfully, Sanford has the idea to rig up some C4, of which is used to blow off the Blackguard's armor, revealing his emaciated form underneath. In spite of this, the Blackguard is no less capable as a warrior, but is ultimately defeated by our three intrepid heroes. Moving forward, they meet up with Jebus, and the group decide to split into teams of 2. Each team will provide entrance into the upper layer of the science tower for the other. First, we'll cover Demos and Jeb's mission, Shakedown. As Demos and Jeb fight their way through swaths of Nexus Core soldiers, how about we look at some more snoopables? Several balled up sheets of paper, printed with lines of algorithmic programmer jargon and theorems, all of which have been scribbled over and crossed out. It looks like the Nexus Core have been trying to reboot Project Nexus for several years. None of their numerous attempts have been successful. It seems the Nexus Core may not have ever actually rebooted Project Nexus. Was Doc fed misinformation somehow? Is this entire mission all for nothing? Or did they actually manage to reboot the project and it is continuing as usual? Early on in Shakedown, you may have noticed a scientist being accosted by an agent for not working fast enough, said work going into trying to bring Project Nexus back online. The scientist mentions that without the Keystone Fragment, it has been extremely difficult to do so. It very well may be that Project Nexus never did come back online, and Jebus was right all along. The project cannot function without the fragment. This question confused me enough to where I asked Swain himself for a bit of elaboration, so here's what he had to say. Without the Keystone Artifact, Project Nexus is just about in hibernation mode. We originally thought that the other place could not be accessed whatsoever without the Halo, but over the years we decided it was just a slow process. I guess more specifically, it's significantly more hazardous, so the Nexus Core takes its time. Basically, the Nexus Core was able to continue Project Nexus, but at a snail's pace compared to when they had the Halo. Jebus succeeded in slowing down Project Nexus, but not quite stopping it outright. Nearly every commission or vendor requested by private firms issued to the Nexus Core are requisitions for the clone soldiers of the 1V02P_6 combat variety. However, many bulk orders have been fulfilled on behalf of the AHW, but never for soldiers. It seems they were only ever interested in acquiring cloning equipment outright. Eventually, it seems the agency shifted away from buying men directly from the Nexus Core and instead wanted their own cloning vats in order to produce soldiers on site on their own terms. Also, we get further confirmation that Subject 1V's self has been placed into various Generation 4 clone soldiers, and they seem to be in high demand, likely for these soldiers' improved skill set due to having Subject 1V's self implanted within them.
Director Phobos, we do not care that you have lost your way. We are not troubled by your stubbornness or lack of focus. However, my fellow employers and I do not tolerate disobedience. The fact that you take issue with my order to supply the AAHW is of no consequence to me. Deliver the designated cloning equipment to the AAHW to the letter of our specification. Otherwise, prepare for retirement from our project and your swift determination to follow.
This message most likely comes from the Auditor, berating Phobos due to his refusal to supply the AAHW with cloning equipment. The Auditor, and by extension the employers, also state they do not give a good goddamn that Phobos has more or less just been using Project Nexus to forward his own personal goals, consequences be damned. A whole lot of good you guys are doing is, gods Further on into Shakedown, Jebus and Deimos encounter possibly the most heinous Nexus Core monstrosity yet, the Hive. It's unknown exactly what the Hive was meant for, but it seems to be a mag agent who is designed to effectively be an organic cloning vat, spitting out fully formed Nevadians from within its massive stomach. This horrendous beast is chained up and restrained, but very quickly breaks out upon seeing that its containment cell has been breached. Jeb comments that this monster must be destroyed quickly, and that is exactly what he and Deimos do, all while being assaulted by Nexus Core agents and the Hive slugs, unfinished biological organisms produced directly from the Hive. At the end of the stage, Deimos and Jeb release the locks preventing Sanford and Deimos from progressing, so let's change gears and see how things went for those two, huh? Climb, with an exclamation point at the end, is one of the most difficult stages in Project Nexus. Sanford and Hank are absolutely swarmed with Nexus Core goons who are hell-bent on their destruction. To make matters worse, the Nexus has called in the AHW for backup, who quite literally start crawling out of the walls just for the opportunity to kill Hank. If these guys are anything, they're dedicated, an aspect we'll see more of as the series progresses. While Sanford and Hank fight their way through the AHW Nexus Core, let's check out some more snoopables. Hundreds of balled up pages discuss proposals for the weaponization of dissonant reality. They go back many, many years, the oldest of which bear the veto stamp of Dr. Christoph. Eventually, the weapon project was approved for a facility referred to as the Museum. Christoph attempted to stop the Nexus Core from weaponizing dissonance to no avail. I guess if there was one thing I can praise Jebus for, it's sticking to his and his friends' ideals. Hofnar wouldn't have wanted dissonance to be weaponized either. In spite of Jeb's obvious manipulations of Hofnar, they at least seem to see eye to eye on a few things. I just can't fathom how the AHW operate. It keeps me up at night. One man? They exist solely to destroy one man? How powerful can this Hank Wimbledon actually be? And who put them up to it? If the employers were involved, then the AHW would have a charter just like Project Nexus. If you ask me, it stinks of personal vendetta. I'm not very good at riddles, and so far no one has given us a straight answer. Finally, somebody asking the real questions. Jokes aside, this Nexus agent actually raises some good points. Is Hank really such a problem that an entire organization needed to be formed just for his destruction? Evidently, the answer is yes, as the Nexus Core will soon learn as Hank effortlessly cuts through hordes of their men. Also, an average Nexus Core agent is aware of the employers, meaning their existence might not be such forbidden knowledge, or maybe this agent has been snooping through some top secret documents. We have it! Years of barren discovery have finally borne fruit. Director Phobos will be most pleased. We have always understood what dissonance does. It strips away the very logic of whatever it contacts. Improbability replaces likelihood. Up is down. Sanity yields to madness. Understanding what dissonance actually is, however, this has eluded us for decades. We used to believe it was the radioactive byproduct of implanting a self into a cloned body. It seems infinitely more likely that every self is itself a partial gateway to the other place. When the divergence engine cleans the self, some of that gateway remains behind. If this is true, then the director must be aware that Project Gestalt may proceed as planned. Here we get our most thorough explanation on what dissonance actually is. It's antimatter. It makes things that do exist into things that do not. Also, this scientist mentions every self being a small gateway to the other place, which checks out. After all, how could they end up in hell if they didn't have a way to get there? We also learn that the Divergence Engine, true to its name, was cleaning selves of dissonance and making them fit for Project Nexus. We have assembled all the pieces. Subject 1V02P_6's program is complete, and his training, along with canisters of Dr. Hofnar's concentrated divergence, are prepared for induction into the body of an unfinished mag using Dr. Crackpot's enmeshment program. We estimate rapid and substantial growth in the structure of the vessel once incubation is terminated. There is no predicting where the limit of this growth might be found. I speculate that it may be potentially infinite. Project Gestalt will now enter its initial testing phase. I pray for all our souls that the director is certain about this, because if it works, Project Nexus will have achieved its final purpose, and we never need fear the collapse of reality again. The scientist here speculates on the growth of Project Gestalt, which said plainly here is potentially infinite. We see this as story mode progresses. Gestalt from his first appearance until now is much larger than he was before. The scientist also mentions Project Nexus's final purpose, which seems to be Gestalt's consumption of every self in the other place, leaving it empty and Phobos a god, one who could reshape Nevada in his own image with his godlike abilities. All three sectors of the Nexus Core's research culminate into Gestalt. Hofnar's Dissonant Research, Jeb's Arena Program, and Crackpot's Enmeshment Program are all used to create this monstrous mag, a terrifying sight indeed. Climb ends with Hank and Sanford narrowly escaping a massive onslaught of Nexus and Agency soldiers, finding the lever that will allow them access to the upper portion of the tower. Unfortunately, it's blocked by thick, bulletproof glass, but Sanford is able to jury-rig some C4 to blow it up. Nice going, guy. With the lever flipped, all four protagonists can finally meet up in the final stage of the game, the Rush. The Rush, for all intents and purposes, is the final level of Project Nexus. All four of our protagonists that we've gradually assembled, those being Hank, Jebus, Sanford, and Demos, must now face the gauntlet of failed Nexus Core experiments who have been locked up in the upper region of the tower for over 30 years. The first of these horrendous experiments the group must face are Lamenters, abominations who have been exposed to dissonant energy in order to see what the effects may be. Nexus scientists figured out that the abominations seem to suffer from rampant self-hatred, which manifests in them tearing away bits of their own flesh. In order to try and encourage them to channel their hatred outwards, they were exposed to dissonant energy to make them more aggressive. After felling the Lamenters, Odium abominations appear before the eyes of our main characters. Odium abominations are probably the Nexus Core's most mysterious experiment, as they do not have a clearly defined purpose. Also note that they have an arm, similar to that of Maghank as seen in Madness 9 and onwards. It is unknown where Odiums come from or why they exist, but nonetheless they are fearsome creatures indeed. In spite of the support of the Lamenters, the Odiums and Lamenters are destroyed, and the group can continue higher through the tower. In the second room of the Rush, the group encounters a dissonant mini-ghouls, who, as far as I know, have never actually been given an official name. These miniature versions of ghoul are loaded up with dissonance, and are capable of spitting it out as their primary form of attack. Upon death, they let out a screech and explode into dissonant energy in a last attempt to kill their attackers. Moving on to the third room, the group encounter dissonant golems, once normal golems that were fitted with armor and of course loaded up to the brim with dissonance. This dissonance naturally made them go completely insane and hyper-aggressive, which is on display in this particular room. Dissonant golems are a force to be reckoned with, and have the ability to teleport around the combat arena, making them quite the annoyance to deal with. After a brief conversation and elevator ride, the gang encounters quite a few snoopables. Let's read them, shall we?
Behold, Nexus City, a technological marvel and beacon of hope for all Nevadians of every faction. Far beyond the simple gray living tubes of your typical Nevada commune, this cutting-edge wonderland will feature energy reclamation technology, sleepwalker dream assimilation, Life Pro cloning facilities, and a basketball court. We can't wait to see what a Nexus future holds for all of us. And it's all thanks to Project Nexus, embarking on a voyage to divergence.
Classic Nexus Core propaganda at its finest. Admittedly, they aren't overly exaggerating just how impressive Nexus City actually is, as energy reclamation technology allows them to synthesize effectively infinite food, ensuring the populace will never go hungry. Sleepwalker dream assimilation means that a regular citizen could become a combat master in the comfort of their own sleep. Life Pro cloning facilities means a citizen will never have to worry about dying. However, like everything, there is a catch, namely in the form of the Life Pro cloning facilities. You see, early on in my original lore video, I neglected to mention the specifics of how exactly Generation 4 Nevadians work. Generation 4 Nevadians can never quite reach the full potential of their Generation 2 counterparts. When a Generation 2 Nevadian enters Hell/the other place, they are slowly stripped away, layer by layer, until they are completely digested. These layers could go on to form the entire self of a Generation 4, which is why these Generation 4 Nevadians are quite one-note or limited compared to GO2s. And in case I forgot to mention, Generation 2 Nevadians are somewhat mysterious, as we don't entirely know where they came from. However, what we do know is that all of our main protagonists, such as Sanford, Demos, Jebus, and probably Hank, are Generation 2 Nevadians. We'll talk more about Hank's generation when we get to Madness 9.5, which will likely be in my next video. And speaking of Generation 4s, why don't we read some more of the snoopables about them here in the Science Tower?
Behold, consumer, the Generation 4, brought to you by the Nexus Core. This little guy is the future of Nevada, the future of you. The ultimate insurance policy. The Generation 4 will give you a second lease on life if the perils of this world should pluck you away. And they will, but with the Nexus technology, we found the answer. When you come back, you'll do it as the most perfect version of yourself. You might even wonder why you didn't get cloned sooner, but don't take our word for it. Ask any one of our Nexus Core scientists and security officials. They're all Generation 4 and loving it.
This pretty much strengthens what I already said earlier. Nexus Core propaganda in favor of Generation 4 cloning. The Nexus advertises being Geo4 as a more perfect version of yourself, and maybe to the Nexus you are. Generation 4s are much simpler creatures, so they're probably much easier to control and rule over too.
Fear hunger no more. The energy reclamation technology of the new industrial sector will put an end to your days of empty pockets and stomachs. By harnessing the patented innovations of our friends at Merck, Nexus City will be outfitted to provide for its thousands of residents with zero cost to the consumer. How could you not want a little piece of that utopia for yourself?
This is basically what it says on the tin. The Nexus Core, in collaboration with Merck, has ended hunger in Nexus City due to being able to synthesize food from pure energy. Real Star Trek level stuff, huh?
Hey there, chum. Why are you so worried about the dangers of day-to-day life? Maybe it's because you haven't signed up for an irresistible life insurance policy at Life Pro Cloning Facilities, located on every corner of the brand new residential sector. Payment plans start at low rates, but who even cares? Paying off your policy is your clone's problem. All you have to worry about now is how to live the high life today. Life Pro, for when you're not a pro, but your insurance is.
The Nexus Core advertising immortality to its populace. Not gonna lie, they drive a hard bargain, but as I mentioned earlier, the normal Geo2 citizens of Nexus City are blissfully unaware that they will be reincarnated as much more simple, archaic versions of their past selves.
Have you ever wanted to learn how to play the piano? How about dual-wield a pair of tennis rackets? Why, you'd be the belle of the ball if only you could pirouette like the star you know you are. Worry not, for your days of unskilled mediocrity are over. Say hello to the Sleepwalker Dream Assimilation Program, featured right here in Nexus City's sprawling commercial district. Now, slip into a set of our bedtime headwear and wake up tomorrow a new person. You'll be playing first chair trumpet for the Nevada Orchestra in no time.
After the Nexus Core figured out how to make sleepwalkers, they also realized they could sell this technology to the general public. Any old Nexus City citizen could learn any skill they want, entirely from the comfort of their own sleep. However, if this technology is any way similar to actual sleepwalkers, you might not want to use these devices too much, lest you risk becoming an abomination due to the influx of all that experience.
We know you've been reading the Nexus news, and our gracious Director Phobos has heard your concerns. Our clones are now 100% better than ever before. Our brand new Sleepwalker Dream Assimilation technology is the miracle solution to the failures of our early tests. We assure that there is no chance your clone will awaken with his mind snapped, twisted into an existence of anger and torment as he experiences a lifetime of memories in a single instant. All such clones have been destroyed, posing no threat to you, the average citizen. We promise. Instead, Sleepwalker Dream Assimilation spreads the learning across as few as 2 months. Your clone will come back with all of your own memories, plus whatever special package you decide to purchase, such as hacking, explosives, and vent crawling.
As I mentioned earlier, it seems earlier versions of the Sleepwalker Dream technology caused a few people to become abominations. Oops. However, it does seem like the Nexus core was able to refine this technology, simply spreading out the experiences gained over a longer period of time instead of instantly shoving them in all at once. Also, hacking, explosives, and vent crawling are references to the vocations Demos, Sanford, and Hank have.
What's wrong, chum? Having trouble reaching that last can of hot dogs at the top of your cupboard? Not strong enough to lift a Merc brand truck off the ground for daily repairs? Well, fret no more, because Phase 2 of the Generation 3 limited model butlers is now underway. We've got the tech to pump them out bigger, stronger, and more helpful than ever before. Plus, patrons of the all-new Generation 3 limited model are issued a lifetime warranty on their new Mammoth friend, free of charge. We'll patch that gentle giant back together at any of our Nexus facilities, located in every city district.
Here we see the Nexus core advertising golems as products and property. Don't you just love government-sanctioned slavery? The Nexus core sure does.
What are we doing with all this dissonant reality we have lying around, you might be asking? Don't you worry, young tourist. Director Phobos believes in using every byproduct of the divergence process. Thanks to our genius scientist, we've begun to turn what was once reality-warping, radioactive miasma into a viable power source. Soon, we'll have a brand new generation of mechanical helpers, all sputtering around the winds of dissonant energy. What a future!
This is our first inclination into Generation 5 Nevadians, better known more simply as robots. A certain Dr. Herman Gahn, who we will discuss a bit later once we're finished with story mode proper, is the creator of these fantastical robots. These robots were likely intended to eventually replace golems, as well as providing labor in the mining sector in the form of heavy lifting and mining.
If you thought we were done innovating, then you need to go back to one of our Nexus-funded educational compounds. We'll never stop innovating for you, dear consumer. We stand at the cusp of a brand new turn, the brink of scientific curiosity and bravery. Soon, every home will have its own Generation 5 Row Butler. Pre-order yours today and give your tired old Generation 3 the break it deserves.
Speaking of Generation 5s, these robotic servants were advertised as an alternative to golems, and are debatably the more humane option. I'd certainly rather have robots being built to serve the common people rather than living, thinking, sentient organic beings.
I don't care. I want every single clone ready for combat.
Seriously? Even the little bebbies doing grocery pickup?
Yes, all of them. I'm moving forward with Project Gestalt, and I need every self prepared for the transition.
Lol, K.
Feel free to give yourself a combat boost as well. Payment for all the hard speech to text. Text!
I don't have much of a reason to include this one other than I thought it was funny. This does, however, explain how Hofnar was such a capable combatant during Jebus's insurrection. Seems he got that combat boost after all. Moving on, the group enters the next room, a floating platform in a pool of dissonance. Here, they fight some of the robots I mentioned earlier, these specific ones being of the Crusher variety, robots intended to work in the mining sector. Unfortunately, they weren't very good at it, however, as the shockwaves they sent stomping the ground caused numerous cave-ins and fatalities. Oops. Before we move on to the final portion of the game, why don't we learn about how to make ourselves a mag agent? Certainly the process of building these gargantuan soldiers is quite lengthy and convoluted.
So, you want to make a mag, do ya? It's a dedicated process that requires thousands of man-hours with a professional Nexus handiwork. First, you'll need a micro-calcified bone framework, laced with carbon fiber mesh network. Without the added robustness of an engineered skeletal structure, your new mag will collapse under its own weight. Now, let's put some meat on the lad. Ordinary meat won't do the trick. Only apply preconditioned Nexus-grade muscle cultures grown in director-approved carbon farms. Samples from Nevada's top athletes were spliced to create this perfect twitch muscle fiber specimen. Next, we stretch an impact-resistant lattice of polyorganic ethylene skin over our incubating mag, guaranteeing imperviousness to high-caliber weapons and common, everyday mishaps.
So, mags are built from the ground up, huh? Seems they have a bit of artificial everything from skeletons to skin to muscles. It's actually pretty fascinating to think about the biological implications of it all, as if we were to build a human that would be the relative size to us as mag agents are to Nevadians, we would probably be doing a lot of the same things. Also, mags are most certainly not impervious to high caliber weaponry. If anything, they seem uniquely vulnerable to it. With all those snoopables out of the way, we make our way into the office of Director Phobos himself, his beaten and battered corpse from his legendary battle with Jebus in front of his computer. If we look closely at the computer monitor, we can see in his final moments, Phobos was able to activate Project Gestalt, and most likely transport himself into Gestalt before he could make it to the other place. Also, the Nexus charter is on display in this room. We can't actually read it, however. There is an interesting Easter egg here. For those who are familiar with modding Unity games, you probably know textures and 3D models can be extracted by a nifty little program called the Unity Asset Studio. Using this program, we can extract the texture and see that the Nexus Charter has been signed by the Auditor, the Chairman, and the Adjudicator. Chairman and Adjudicator were ultimately scrapped from the employer lineup, but we can assume that they were high-ranking employers, perhaps presiding over the rest of the employers. Auditor, of course, is very much important, and we'll talk some more about him in a bit. But now, it's time for the final confrontation. Reaching the top of the tower, Jeb is seen piloting the Divergence engine, but before he can make any notable progress, a certain Church and George arrive to crash this party. They talk a big game, but are quickly squished and torn apart by Project Gestalt, who has been scaling the side of the tower since Climb. It's time to finally put down this behemoth of a mag agent once and for all. Jebus says that in order to defeat Gestalt, they must charge the Divergence engine to render it vulnerable. After much resistance from Gestalt, Hank and Co. are able to throw the power cables into their necessary sockets, giving Gestalt a mighty zap of improbability and dissonance, and finally deal some damage to it. Once 3 of Gestalt's corpus blocks are destroyed, it seems the influx of dissonance has caused him to rapidly mutate, sprouting wings and firing a deadly beam of energy at our protagonist. Hank, Sanford, and Demos are able to make use of explosives and dissonant weapons in order to destroy the remaining 3 of Gestalt's corpus. After doing so, Gestalt is down but not out. But before the trio can finish off this hulking great pain in the behind, the self-energy of a certain Director Phobos comes drifting out of his eye. After a very villainous monologue, the final battle begins. Hank, Sanford, and Demos versus the self of Director Phobos. Midway through the fight, Phobos steals the halo from Jebus, and it takes on a fiery form never seen before until now. It's a hard-fought battle, but Hank and company manage to get the job done. Phobos' last corpus breaks, and in a last-ditch effort to achieve godhood, Phobos attempts to fuse with Gestalt one last time. However, Sanford packs some secret backup C4 this entire mission, of which he gladly uses to blow Gestalt's head wide open. However, this explosion isn't quite enough to kill him, and the trio finish him off. Personally, my favorite method of killing Gestalt is by throwing his own tusks directly into his head. Ouch! Gestalt lets out one final cry, and just like that, he's out for the count. Phobos has been defeated, banished back to hell where he belongs, and his vessel Gestalt is no more. There is only one thing left to do: destroy Project Nexus. But wait, didn't we decide a bit ago that was a bad idea? We should just let Christoph restart the project. That's probably the better outcome. Unfortunately for you, dear viewer, Hank has other ideas. In a shocking display of betrayal, Hank shoots Christoph right out of the tower window with a rocket launcher, leaving his halo to clatter lifelessly to the ground. Sanford and Demos immediately question him. What the heck is Hank's deal? Hank claims that the mission was always to destroy Project Nexus, that this is what they were sent here to do, and he's not going to let Sanford and Demos stop him without a fight. Hank openly admits to looking forward to the opportunity to kill Sanford and Deimos, and the fight begins. It's not a difficult fight by any means, but Hank goes down, suffering his first canonical death in Project Nexus, meaning we can up the Hank death tally to 4 known deaths up to this point. With Hank dead and Kristoff's fate unknown to them, Sanford and Deimos discuss what they should do next as they stare off into the distance. Down at the bottom of the tower, Kristoff is very much alive. The sheriff comes in to check on him, of which Kristoff immediately requests that the sheriff assemble any men he has left, as Hank is atop of the tower and ready to end the world. But before that can happen, the employers arrive, and we get a glimpse of their true form. Here's the 3D model actually used for the employers' true form. As you can see, they are very mechanical in nature, almost made out of scrap and loose wires. The employers appear before Kristoff and Sheriff at the foot of the tower, and Kristoff is not happy. He accosts the employers, informs them that they do not belong in Nevada. The employers quickly silence this insolence, and inform Kristoff that they have a new mission for him. The auditor steps forth to tell Kristoff this personally, and after he does so, the employers vanish. So, wait a minute, who exactly are these guys, these employers? You've been talking about them the whole video, but never once stopped to explain who they are. So spit it out, Zepp, who are they? Well, the employers are quite enigmatic beings, but I will attempt to explain them to the best of my ability. The employers, for all intents and purposes, are stewards of the machine itself. They represent core tenets of reality, each employer representing a core function of Nevada itself. The auditor, the red-eyed employer, represents order. His purpose is to bring order to Nevada and ensure that chaos does not reign supreme. Stygian, the magenta-eyed employer, is the ferryman of souls from Nevada to the other place. They reside over the cycle of life and death. The conductor's purpose is unknown, however I theorize he has to do with the Prime Code. We will discuss this Prime Code in more detail very shortly. The Deliberator is the most enigmatic and mysterious of the employers, and is notably the only one to be kind to Dr. Kristoff, while the rest berate and demean him. While we do not know his direct purpose, I theorize that the Deliberator may be involved in making deals with mortals such as Phobos and the Nexus Charter. Also, a discussion I had with Swain implies that the Deliberator may be the one in charge of assigning quote-unquote main character status to individuals in Nevada, so to speak. It could be that the Deliberator is the arbiter of fate and destiny itself. From here on out, story mode is finally, totally, actually completed. Kristoff's fate is left uncertain, however I theorize it has much to do with the events of Madness 5. Now that we have finished the game, and before we move on to the Legacy of the Self-Eater questline, I need to clarify a few things. Number 1, timeline placement. Throughout this video, I have claimed multiple times that Madness Project Nexus takes place between Madness Combat 4 and Madness Combat 5, and many of you probably disagree with me on this. However, allow me to provide evidence to support my claim. You may have noticed that early on into story mode, Hank mentions killing the sheriff. This is a direct reference to Madness Combat 3, with Hank having done exactly that. Later on, Tricky mentions teaming up with Jebus to kill Hank, another reference to Madness 3 and possibly Madness 4 as well. In one of the flashbacks, Doc mentions stitching Jebus up from the scattered remnants of his own corpse, clearly alluding to his explosive death in Madness 4. However, I already know what you're thinking. Zepp, the outfits. The outfits don't line up. Hank looks like how he does in Madness 7, and Sanford and Deimos look how they do in Madness 9. And yes, I am aware of this visual inconsistency. However, the explanation for such things is shockingly simple. Hank, Sanford, and Deimos are characters who change their clothes often. Hank gets a new outfit for every episode, for crying out loud, and here in Project Nexus we just watched him die. Of course he would get a new outfit come the next chronological entry, Madness Combat 5. It's par for the course. As for Sanford and Deimos, one of their lines of dialogue in the ending is that Hank won't be happy that they killed him, alluding to the fact that Sanford and Deimos are aware of Hank's ability to come back to life. Because of this, they may have ditched their old outfits in the Rift, as seen in Madness 6.5, in order to hide from Hank, who would most certainly be out for blood. However, that's just speculation and I cannot directly confirm that. Ultimately, I'll let the words of a certain Michael Swain, the lead writer and programmer of Project Nexus, sway your view. Let me just take a look at 3, 4, and 5 real quick. So, I know we don't really go on cosmetics much to explain cartoon and game correlation, because MPN does for sure take place after Madness 4. Guaranteed. Yet Tricky has no damage on his mask in the story campaign, but I'm pretty sure the stitched up Jeb we see raking dirt is in the same condition he's in with the game. I find those visual inconsistencies easy to explain away with a healthy dose of headcanon, but I will be reflecting the notion that officially the outfits are up to interpretation, said headcanon being Tricky simply got a new mask. Either way, I'm satisfied with knowing that MPN snugly slots in between 4 and 5. One could even call it Madness 4.5. It's a good theory, wish I could blurt out a confirm or deny, but the fun isn't in the knowing. Yeah, after all, you haven't stated what MPN comes before. It definitely comes before 9, which leaves potential slots as between 4 and 5, between 5 and 6, and between 6 and 7, and between 7 and 8. I know which one I'm picking. I know that doesn't tell you specifically much, but I guess you have me saying it in writing now. And that, my friends, is my argument for why Madness Project Nexus takes place after Madness 4 and before Madness 5. With that can of worms out of the way, we can finally move on to the Legacy of the Self-Eater questline. But I can't help but notice my throat is getting a little sore from all this talking. I mean, how long have I been going now? I'm gonna let my buddy HARDWAY Jones take over from here. He's a huge cyber bandit fanatic, and I couldn't think of anybody better to take over when it came to this particular topic of Madness lore. So go right ahead, HARDWAY.
Greetings, Grunts. My good friend Zep here has graciously invited me to round off his second incredible lore video by breaking down the Legacy of the Self-Eater update for Madness Project Nexus. This endgame questline features some of the most unique and interesting lore in all of Madness canon, so I'm really grateful to Zep for giving me this opportunity to ramble about it in his video while I put off working on my own. Let's get right into it, shall we? Once the final credits have rolled and the employers have finished tormenting Dr. Kristoff, the Legacy of the Self-Eater questline will become accessible. To begin, the player must walk west from the lift at the base of the science tower, along the street and then up a set of stairs. At the top will be a building with a giant gear above a sign that says Robotronics Labs, a Nexus subsidiary and annex. I'll quickly note that Robotronics is a portmanteau, a made-up word that combines the sounds and meanings of two others, in this case robotics and electronics. The implication here is that the field of robotronics goes beyond conventional robotics. Only one way to find out. Heading inside, we discover a futuristic computer lab, apparently abandoned despite seeming clean and functional, as well as some interesting snoopables.
This is Dr. Elmenko, head of Nexus City Robotronics, submitting a progress report to Director Phobos on the establishment of Project Nexus's newest and most innovative branch. Work is ongoing, but ahead of schedule. Merc contractors have completed preliminary construction of the new facility and have been evacuated from the premises so that licensed, high-clearance Nexus Core engineers can wrap up the remainder, which has been classified at the level of E7. I'm ready to pivot my Generation 5 research from theory into practice the instant the engineers are finished installing the sensitive equipment I requisition for Project Cobalt.
This is effectively our introduction to the elusive Dr. Gon, the fourth and final Project Nexus scientist that we learn about in-game. It appears that while Drs. Kristoff and Hofnar were leading research into resurrective cloning and dissonant reality, and Dr. Crackpot was busy plagiarizing designs for enmeshment tech amidst a drug-fueled bender in Nevada Central, Dr. Gon was pioneering the field of robotronics to produce the fifth generation of Nevadians, i.e. robots. Dr. Gon also makes reference to a certain Project Cobalt. We have no notion what this project is just yet, but the next snoopable is on the terminal just ahead. Perhaps it might help enlighten us.
This is Dr. Herman Gon, head of Nexus City Robotronics, submitting a progress report to Director Phobos on the continued work of my branch. My facility is ready to deploy the first line of Gen 05 crushers and liftbots to the mining sector. Phasing out merc labor within Nexus City, as I understand it, is meant to be a long-term goal. But we are now well ahead of schedule. With this newfound extra time, I've already initialized Project Cobalt. Subjects are receptive. Further reports to follow. I offer a recommendation to secure the sector monolith first, working outward towards the pump axis to grow a perimeter of control around the science tower while my branch prepares the next line of robotic servants to replace the grotesquely obsolete Generation 3 limited model.
Indeed, it seems one major purpose of Nexus City Robotronics was to replace flesh and blood laborers with robotic ones, because even in Nexus City, automation is coming for your job. We're also beginning to get a sense for Dr. Gon's pragmatic mindset, and his preoccupation with keeping ahead of schedule. This will be relevant shortly, but just keep it in mind for now. Finally, Project Kobold is mentioned yet again, but alas, still no hint as to what it actually is, except that it involves sensitive equipment and test subjects. Proceeding through the door to the inner sanctum of the Robotronics lab, our chosen characters will discover a clockwork altar supported by two blue-eyed statuettes and a mechanical sword embedded in a rotating pedestal. By the way, I say chosen characters because the legacy of the Self-Eater takes place across the hub world rather than in individual stages. This means the player can start and finish the quest line with any of the playable characters in story mode, all of whom have unique dialogue throughout. Unfortunately for us loreheads, it also introduces ambiguity as to which characters actually completed the quest canonically. I personally like to think it was Dr. Kristoff and the Sheriff, considering that they're who we're left in control of when the main story concludes and the Robotronics lab becomes available. Of all the playable characters, Kristoff also happens to have the most insightful dialogue lines, due to being a former Nexus scientist alongside Dr. Gon. Plus, his Nexus bolt ability and the Sheriff's infinite ammo will come in handy before too long, but I digress. Upon interacting with the unusual altar before us, the blade will slowly dislodge from its pedestal. Then the single ominous toll of a funeral bell will ring out, right before an explosion knocks the player character flat and fragments of the sword zoom off in 4 separate directions. The pedestal will stop rotating, the glowing eyes of the statuettes will flicker out, and a strange character with electric blue markings will appear behind the glass in the corner of the room, scolding our protagonists for their actions. This is a cyber bandit. You might have glimpsed one scurrying around the science tower during the final story mode stage, and if you're playing as Dr. Kristoff here, he'll recognize them as vermin, presumably because, Jeb's imperiousness notwithstanding, the cyber bandits do seem to live unbidden in the tower's walls. Anyway. This cyber bandit warns that because we removed the sword from its pedestal, an indestructible nightmare is now hunting us. It's unclear how the bandit knows this, but astute observers will have noticed that the statuettes on either side of the altar closely resemble our bionic visitor, which begs the question, why are there statues of cyber bandits, the so-called vermin of the science tower, here in Dr. Gon's lab? Before we can get any answers, there's the loud groaning of heavy machinery, and the cyber bandit abruptly explodes in a splatter of blue blood, killed by some unseen threat. It's at this point that I'd like to introduce a theory. There's this classic trope in fiction of the German-sounding doctor or mad scientist. We've all encountered this before, whether it's the medic from Team Fortress 2 or Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb, and though we never actually hear him speak, I speculate that Dr. Gon might fit this trope as well. For one, he's obsessively punctual and utterly humorless, both of which are unfortunate German stereotypes. Secondly, his name is literally Hermann, as in Hermann the German. But thirdly, and most importantly, Dr. Gon named his project Kobold. Now, kobolds appear in all varieties nowadays, especially in fantasy, but in the original German folklore, a kobold is a household spirit, a sort of fairy that lives in people's homes. As is often the case with fae folk in stories, kobolds are shy and fickle in nature, helpful and benevolent if dealt with kindly, but capable of vengeful mischief if mistreated. But wait, there's more. See, the name of the chemical element cobalt comes from a nickname given by miners to certain mischievous metals that produce toxic fumes when melted down, that is, cobalt ore or goblin ore. It's from that same cobalt that we get the rich blue pigment known as cobalt blue, and as we've just witnessed, the tower-dwelling cyber bandits are not only covered from head to toe in blue markings and equipment, they even bleed blue, as if their very biology is mostly electronic, or should I say robotronic. If we wanted to hazard a guess at who the subjects of how Dr. Gon's Project Kobold were, the cobalt-blooded cyber bandits lingering in and around the science tower like cybernetic sprites, or robotronic kobolds, would certainly be a strong candidate. But let's park this theory for now and carry on. Making our way into the computer lab, we will find the ghostly digital faces of the cyber bandits leering at us through the many screens, evidently not impressed. Their mischief is the least of our worries, however, as when we exit the lab, the death knell will ring out yet again. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Our doom now approaches in the form of a robed and red-eyed robot bearing a massive scythe. As you might have gathered, this is the titular Self-Eater, Nevada's own Grim Reaper, capable of permanently deleting its victims from existence by deleting their very souls. No ticket to the other place, no second chances. We're in for a tough fight against an entity that cannot be permanently killed, but should we prove adept enough to temporarily disable the Eater and rifle through its scrap metal, the magnetic particles we kick up will guide us towards a sector of Nexus City that might hold some answers. Searching the sector hinted at by the Eater's remains, we soon discover a glowing portal with a clockwork cog for a frame. Upon entering said portal, we emerge to find ourselves in what looks like a back room of the science tower that has been converted into a shrine by cyber bandits. Dispatching the bandits guarding these liminal halls, as they call them, we are free to interact with two more snoopables, the first of which is a terminal displaying yet another missive from Dr. Gon.
This is Dr. Herman Gon, head of Nexus City Robotronics, submitting a progress report to Director Phobos on Project Kobold and its subjects. We don't currently have this language to describe what exactly the machine is, or how we can incorporate it into Project Kobold. All I know for certain is that it works. Snippets of prime code provided to my lab by your mysterious benefactor have adapted to subjects with a 100% success rate. It's only a matter of time until we advance past self-containment into full self-destruction, as you previously stipulated.
This is the first time the machine, the metaphysical clockwork computer that governs and embodies Nevada's reality, has been mentioned by a character outside of arena mode. Despite not fully understanding it, Dr. Gon nevertheless intended to harness the power of the machine for Project Kobold by way of something called prime code, snippets of which were given to him by a mysterious benefactor of Director Phobos. This missive also appears to answer the question of what Project Kobold's primary objective was, to grant Project Nexus a means of completely destroying self-energy, which should be impossible as far as thermodynamics is concerned, but tell that to the scythe-wielding Terminator that's hunting us. So what is prime code? How did it enable Dr. Gon to create the Self-Eater? And who gave it to him? Tinfoil hats on please, it's theory time again. Firstly, I have precious little programming experience, but as I understand it, code is essentially the language of computers, a set of rules by which they interpret and execute instructions. Secondly, if something is described as prime, it generally means it is of primary importance, fundamental, or first. Therefore, we might infer that the prime code, as it relates to the machine, is the foundational programming language through which the machine is able to send and receive information across all its theoretically infinite moving parts. Thus, when Dr. Gon found himself in possession of the prime code, he was able to more or less reprogram the fabric of reality to further the goals of his project, even before he fully understood what the machine was. As for Director Phobos' mysterious benefactor, who provided Dr. Gon with the prime code, well, we know that the employers essentially granted Director Phobos his position as the head of Project Nexus, and if anyone was likely to know how to speak the language of the machine, it would be them. And given the recurring motif of electricity and the colour blue in this questline, my money's on the conductor, but as it stands, we simply do not know. The next snoopable is a book on a clockwork lectern, seemingly written by the bandits themselves.
There is no death for the Self-Eater. No path to the other place. We could only bind it, and so we deciphered the prime code hidden in the Gonian marks around the city. Doing so provided the faintest glimpse of the machine and an understanding of its manifold. In that moment of epiphany, we saw what needed to be done, but first, we had to find Dr. Gon's marks.
As hinted at by our earlier encounter in the Robotronics lab, the cyber bandits have already been through the terror our protagonists are experiencing right now. They concluded, rightly so, that the Eater needed to be stopped, but one cannot kill that which doesn't live. And by programming the Self-Eater with prime code, Dr. Gon effectively hard-coded its existence into the rulebook of the universe, creating more than just a robot, but a reality, one hell-bent on annihilation. How they managed to bind it is still unclear, but we have our orders. Find the so-called Gonian marks that Dr. Gon left scattered around the city. We're unsure what the intended purpose of these marks even were. Perhaps Dr. Gon left them behind as he was gathering incompatible parts to build the Self-Eater, Or maybe he was hatching a contingency plan specifically in case of a disaster such as this. And so, around we go, snapping photos of these Gonian marks, our minds splintering and fracturing a little more with each revelation they grant us. After collecting these marks, we return to the Cyber Bandit hideout, ready to descend deeper into their strange liminal dimension. We enter into a hallway floating in the endless void, seemingly constructed from yet more parts of the science tower. There's a portrait of Dr. Gon in full colour here, being worshipped by a pair of his followers. His goggles are blue, just like theirs. Our protagonists continue forth, battling more cyber bandits and reading more snoopables along the way.
This is Dr. Herman Gon, head of Nexus City Robotronics, submitting a progress report to Director Phobos on the completion of Project Cobalt. You will have noticed by now that the science tower is running more efficiently than previously recorded. Self-output is up, fuel economy and management is in the 99.9th percentile, and Nexus core ordnance are restored to full and working order across the board. That is because I launched Project Cobalt ahead of notifying you it was ready. As predicted, the core were none the wiser, as per your specifications. The margin for the project's error is 0%, and to maintain our rigorous timeline, it was necessary to move forward without delay. Self-destruction being the final step towards retiring Project Nexus and fulfilling its charter, it was mandatory we crack onward immediately. As always, I have already begun.
This is the last we'll hear from Dr. Gon. It appears he was emboldened by his project's apparent success, such that he implemented Project Cobalt and was ready to begin the final step of self-destruction even before Director Phobos gave him approval to do so. We never get to find out whether this irritated Phobos, but I like to think that it did.
We are to the tower as all are to the machine. We serve it without question, because we are unwitting vassals to it. It is not possible, as we inevitably learned, to liberate oneself from the machine. However, other facets of its framework may become dislodged with the proper application of force. That proper application is a weapon forged of its prime essence, with parts scattered far across the city. Apart, they are inert. Together, they serve to retire the Self-Eater from its annihilatory purpose.
As all beings in Nevada are cogs in the machine, the cyber bandits are cogs in the science tower itself, there to keep the wheels turning and the lights on. Despite, or perhaps because of this bleak existence, they conceive of a secret weapon, one that could lock the Eater away for good and undo the worst of their creator's sins. This weapon, of course, is the Prime Blade, the very same one that was pulled out of the pedestal at the beginning of the questline. It seems we've got to go and find the parts for it, and put it back together bit by bit. Scouring the city yet again, we find more tears in reality hidden throughout, each taking us to a sort of pocket dimension, where we'll have to fight machine entities that previously were only encountered in the ending of Arena Mode. Felling these mechanical devils and dungeons oozing with blue Prime essence, we assemble the necessary components of the Prime Blade. After collecting the fourth and final piece, the only thing left to do is to return to the bandit hideout and assemble the blade at the altar. Before we do that, however, we have two more snoopables to read over.
Sector 7 Nexus Core Engineer Unit Gamma reporting from the site. We've accessed the head roboticist terminal. All equipment is intact. All machinery is well maintained. The facility was switched over to standby mode some time ago. Clearance was granted by Dr. Gon. Currently, Dr. Gon and all subjects of Project Cobalt are AWOL. We're calling in the Quartermaster to tabulate all Nexus Core property on site, but nothing looks unaccounted for here. Nothing's missing if you don't include a Dr. Gon or the subjects.
A Nexus Core engineer, reporting to who we can likely assume is Phobos himself in regards to the status of Project Cobalt, Dr. Gon, and his subjects. Gon has mysteriously disappeared, and so have the subjects, but the remainder of the project seems to be intact. Once we forge the Prime Blade, the final snoopable becomes open to us.
Dr. Gon is now indiscernible from his own creation. Given the opportunity, Director Phobos will undoubtedly glean insight from the Eater's self-destruction and use it to further empower himself. It was imperative we not let that happen, and so we set ourselves to task. With the weapon reforged, the final amends to redeem the hubris of our Creator was not to banish him, a fruitless task that, but to lock him to the machine where no further harm could be done. The Prime Blade was our last hope.
The bandits forged the Prime Blade as a way to banish the Eater. to bind it back to the machine permanently. As long as the blade remains in the pedestal, they would be able to lock it away forevermore. As for Dr. Gon, it's possible that he somehow became one with the Eater itself, as the bandits appear to be implying here. Perhaps he suffered the fate of Dr. Frankenstein, the Self-Eater simply killing him. Perhaps we'll never know. All we know is that, as his name suggests, he's simply gone. With the Prime Blade forged, we can now take the fight directly to the Eater and destroy it once again. It's a boss fight in its own right, one you can choose to have anywhere in Nexus City to fight and destroy the Self-Eater once and for all. Upon defeating it via the use of the Prime Blade, you return the sword to its rightful place, the pedestal from whence it came. The Eater is sealed away yet again, until some other poor fool wanders in here and pulls the sword from the stone. Nevada is safe from yet another world-ending catastrophe, and I think I can finally hand over to Zeb to bring this video to a close. Thanks for having me.
Now that was surely something. Project Nexus is an absolute monster of a game with a mountain of lore, and I do believe I've done a decent job of showcasing all the important details and characters for you here today. But I also want to give special thanks to HARDWAY Jones, whose smooth Australian accent you just got done listening to, giving you an earful about the Self-Eater. Without him, this video would have been a little more difficult to make, and I was super happy and extremely grateful to have him on. I will absolutely be leaving links to his various social medias in the description of this video, so please, if you could spare the time, click on those links and give him a follow over on TikTok and subscribe to him over on YouTube. He's been a huge help in this video, so it's the least I can do. But with that out of the way, of course, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll be happy to provide whatever answers I can. In my next video, we'll be discussing Madness Combat 5 and onward, leading up to Madness Combat 12. That will likely be the final part of this series of lore videos, and who knows, I may just make a supercut of all three of them when all is said and done. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace out.